Tengan todos ustedes muy buenas tardes. El Centro de Estudios Interculturales e Indígenas, CIR, les da la más cordial de las bienvenidas a la jornada de apertura del seminario internacional Identidades, patrimonios e interculturalidades, temas, problemáticas y casos de estudio de ayer y de hoy. Saludamos a las autoridades que hoy nos acompañan. El vicerrector de investigación de la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, señor Pedro Buchón, el rector de la Universidad Academia de Humanismo Cristiano, señor Pablo Venegas, y el director del Centro de Estudios Interculturales Indígenas, señor Pedro Mejía. Nos distinguen con su presencia autoridades universitarias, académicos, investigadores y estudiantes. De manera muy especial saludamos a la conferencista que nos acompañará durante esta primera jornada, la directora del Centro de Patrimonio y Estudios Museísticos y directora de la Escuela de Arqueología y Antropología de la Universidad Nacional Australiana, señora Laurajane Smith. El Centro de Estudios Interculturales Indígenas, CIR, se propone desarrollar investigación interdisciplinaria y colaborativa en temas vinculados a pueblos originarios y relaciones interculturales en Chile. El CIR adopta un enfoque multidisciplinario y comparativo, integrando investigadores de diversos ámbitos académicos, tales como antropología, ciencia política, sociología, psicología, salud pública, historia, educación y lingüística. Las distintas disciplinas que integran el CIR representan tanto su riqueza como su complejidad. Variadas perspectivas convergen dentro de un amplio espacio de relaciones interculturales, sujetos, organizaciones y comunidades indígenas, apelando a diversos ámbitos de investigación, así como marcos teóricos y metodológicos. Es la riqueza interdisciplinaria que se cita en el CIR una de sus grandes fortalezas y a su vez cifra el desafío fundamental de desarrollar un centro de investigación de altos estándares. Con respecto a este seminario, las significaciones, implicancias sociales, políticas y simbólicas del patrimonio histórico-cultural son motivo hoy en día de cuestionamientos, reflexiones y disputas, muchas veces marcados por la búsqueda de entendimientos y reconocimientos en cuanto a sus vinculaciones con la memoria y la reafirmación de identidades de diversos grupos locales. Por otra parte, la relación patrimonios e identidades debe ser abordada bajo el diálogo intercultural, entendido básicamente como un intercambio recíproco entre agentes de distinta tradición cultural para abrir la discusión hacia nuevas líneas de patrimonialización que favorezcan espacios de inclusión y de producción cultural que simultáneamente beneficien los intereses de unos y otros. Este es el contexto en el que se desarrolla el presente seminario. En primer término, hará uso de la palabra el director del Centro de Estudios Interculturales Indígenas, señor Pedro Mejía.
Muy buenos días. Señor rector, don Pablo Venegas, rector de la Academia de Humanismo Cristiano, don Pedro Buchón, vicerrector, sí, está correcto, de investigación. Bueno, primero que nada agradecerles a todos ustedes su presencia aquí. Para nosotros es realmente importante este tipo de actividades que en definitiva nos permite integrar de forma armónica diferentes disciplinas en un área que es fundamentalmente emergente y que se ha ido transformando progresivamente en un área estratégica y políticamente muy interesante como es el área de la patrimonialización y lo que es el patrimonio. A su vez, esta área necesariamente también está glosada por un factor dentro de lo que son las preocupaciones y las intenciones del centro de multiculturalidad. Esto nos hace cruzar de manera aún más densa diferentes disciplinas, en las cuales en definitiva se enmarca disciplinas tradicionales dedicadas al patrimonio, pero se incluyen otro tipo de factores, ¿no es cierto?, tanto políticos, antropológicos como sociológicos, en esta particular área emergente de investigación. El centro, dentro de sus áreas más prioritarias, ha instalado, junto con lo que hemos llamado el patrimonio cultural y también el legado arqueológico, y por último, un área que se nos está transformando progresivamente en importante, bioantropología, como elementos necesarios de los procesos de patrimonialización y lo que significa dentro de un mundo de la interculturalidad y muy particularmente dentro de los pueblos originarios lo que es el patrimonio. Bueno, la intención entonces de este seminario es reflexionar críticamente y analíticamente en relación a estas temáticas que se nos han ido transformando progresivamente en multidisciplinarias y de gran amplitud, que va, por supuesto, desde cuestiones muy técnicas, como era tradicionalmente, de que estuviera en manos principalmente de arquitectos y de conservadores, hasta cuestiones esencialmente sociológicas políticas, donde los pueblos originarios cumplen una actividad estratégica en términos de la reclamación, de la reinstalación y restauración de sus patrimonios, tanto materiales como inmateriales. Bueno, quiero nuevamente agradecerles su presencia acá. Espero que sea un seminario fructífero, no me cabe la menor duda. Agradecer la visita de nuestros investigadores extranjeros que nos están acompañando. Y bueno, desear la mejor de las suertes para el par de conferencias magistrales que tenemos y el taller que realizaremos mañana en vinculación a estas temáticas con la participación activa de representantes de los pueblos originarios. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos las palabras del señor Pedro Meje. Enseguida se dirigirá a ustedes el señor rector de la Universidad Academia de Humanismo Cristiano, el señor Pablo Venegas.
Buenas tardes. Sí, buenas tardes a todos, autoridades, invitados. Me pidieron un saludo para la apertura de este seminario, pero quiero comentarles que soy especialmente sensible a este tema porque participé por muchos años, como yo soy psicólogo de profesión, en un proyecto de educación con niños pequeños, con niños menores de 6 años, y eran comunidades locales quienes nosotros apoyábamos un proceso de construcción de un proyecto educativo para sus hijos, vamos a decir. Esta es una experiencia que hicimos junto con el Ministerio de Educación desde Arica hasta Punta Arenas. Entonces el proceso nosotros lo estructurábamos en que las comunidades hacían una suerte de reconocimiento de su cultura local, de su patrimonio, y de los agentes locales que expresaban mejor esa cultura. Y ese proceso en función de ese proceso de reconocimiento, de construcción de su propia cultura local, ellos construían el proyecto educativo para sus niños. Fue un proyecto en el que aprendí mucho, un programa que duró muchos años, y ahí aprendí cómo estos procesos de reconocimiento del patrimonio están muy cerca de lógicas comunitarias y del desarrollo de cierta dimensión política, vamos a decir, ¿no? En mi concepción el reconocimiento, el conocimiento del patrimonio es una construcción social, y construcción social que va aparejada a una dimensión de reconocimiento, pero también una dimensión política, ¿no? Y eso se hace evidente cuando nosotros observamos lo que ocurre con el pueblo mapuche. Si uno considera que el paisaje es un patrimonio, el paisaje con todo lo que significa el paisaje, las relaciones sociales a las que predispone un paisaje, la interpretación, en fin, en su dimensión no solo física sino subjetiva y de relaciones sociales, y cómo el pueblo mapuche reivindica ahora su territorio y su paisaje, ¿eh? Y entonces el conflicto con las forestales, cómo las forestales invaden y destruyen un paisaje, y las relaciones sociales que está asociado ahí. Entonces uno observa ahí cómo reconocimiento de patrimonio tiene una dimensión política evidente. El otro día vi un programa de televisión donde se entrevistaba a unas personas de una comunidad mapuche y ellos recordaban cómo se había inundado por una central hidroeléctrica su cementerio. Y un cementerio, uno dice, bueno, ahí está la cultura, el pasado, es un patrimonio, ¿eh? Entonces, como uno dice, aquí hay modelos de desarrollo que van destruyendo un patrimonio de un país, y otra vez entonces estamos en una dimensión política. Este proyecto en particular me parece muy importante para nosotros como universidad, porque nosotros entendemos las universidades, y en particular nuestra universidad, como proyectos académicos, pero también proyectos culturales y políticos. Una universidad es fundamentalmente un proyecto político, un proyecto académico, y digo político porque nos interesa desarrollar una cierta mirada de país, una cierta identidad de país, ciertos valores. Entonces este proyecto dialoga muy bien con lo que nosotros queremos ser como universidad, con cómo nos entendemos como una universidad inserta en el país que queremos, ¿no? Entonces el concepto de patrimonio, reconocimiento cultural, identidades, vamos a decir, son contenidos, vamos a decir, que este proyecto desarrolla y que nosotros como universidad valoramos tremendamente. Este tipo de proyectos son proyectos necesarios para un país que busca ser más inclusivo, más participativo, más democrático, leyendo lo que nosotros tenemos como historia. Así que felicito a los participantes del proyecto, y como universidad obviamente expresamos nuestro compromiso. Entiendo que hay intenciones de continuar con este proyecto, toda nuestra voluntad de seguir participando y apoyando esta iniciativa. Les deseo muy buen seminario en estos 3 días. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos desde luego las palabras del señor rector Pablo Venegas. Por último, se dirigirá a ustedes el vicerrector de investigación de la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, el señor Pedro Buchón.
Muy buenas tardes, rector, director y invitada especial, Laurajane Smith, mucho gusto tenerla acá. Y también muy bienvenidos a todos los académicos y sobre todo también estudiantes que están acompañándonos hoy día en este seminario. Desde la Vicerrectoría de Investigación de la Universidad nos toca enterarnos, coordinar, ayudar a gestionar diversos centros de investigación interdisciplinarios, ¿ya? Están los centros FONDAP como este, pero también están institutos milenios, basales y otra gran cantidad de iniciativas, a través de los cuales se busca acercar distintas disciplinas con el fin de abordar problemas complejos. Este es un problema complejo que no puede ser abordado desde una sola óptica y requiere, por ende, la convergencia de distintas miradas a través de alianzas tanto al interior de la universidad como con otras entidades académicas nacionales y con institutos internacionales también, con el fin de, a partir de observaciones locales, nosotros podamos producir un impacto global, ¿ya? Actualmente estamos discutiendo la institucionalidad en educación de nuestro país, no solamente a través del proyecto del Ministerio de Educación y la reforma, sino que también a través de la creación del nuevo Ministerio de Ciencia y Tecnología, y por lo tanto una discusión acerca de qué es lo que es el impacto, cómo confluyen, cómo es la cadena de generación de conocimiento, de investigación y de impacto en la sociedad, es fundamental. Y yo creo que el CIR en esta mirada destaca a través del trabajo desarrollado en torno a los estudios interculturales y la investigación indígena. Yo creo sinceramente que a través de este centro, que ya está en una etapa madura, como conversábamos ayer con Pedro Meje, a través de, tuvimos la reunión del consejo, del consejo que congrega las distintas unidades que albergan este centro. Ya llegó una etapa madura donde se ha realizado investigación de muy buen nivel. Si uno analiza las estadísticas estándares, por decirlo de alguna forma, exigidas por el instrumento que financia este centro, nosotros podemos decir que se han logrado indicadores muy exitosos, y así lo han reflejado las evaluaciones anteriores en términos de número de publicaciones, de impacto, eventos y difusión, más de 200, realmente eran cifras bien impresionantes. Y ahora que este centro ya llega a una etapa que podríamos decir madura o de cierta madurez, yo creo que es vital poder trabajar más fuertemente, y así lo conversábamos, con las comunidades indígenas, con otras unidades, ver cómo nosotros podemos realmente abordar lo largo de nuestro país y poder integrarlo en esta discusión a través de contribución a políticas públicas y en el fondo de elementos que nos permitan acrecentar esta ligazón y este impacto social. Por supuesto, esto va de la mano y es necesario para lograr lo anterior, no solamente interactuar o acrecentar el vínculo con las comunidades, sino que también entre las mismas instituciones, ¿ya? Y eso yo sé que es complejo. Al principio uno parte con un ideal, al principio uno invita a formar parte en estos proyectos a otras instituciones, y ya cuando uno llega a un cierto estado de madurez, uno ya es capaz de vincularla. Y eso es muy importante tenerlo presente, ver cómo en conjunto se pueden romper esas barreras que no son fáciles de romper, con el fin de poder ir abordando estos problemas complejos, y pues, ciertamente a través de la mirada internacional también, en que las temáticas que nosotros abordamos pueden hacer, por supuesto, avanzar el estado del arte del conocimiento a nivel global, y manteniendo, por supuesto, la calidad científica que han logrado hasta el momento. Así que les deseo un excelente seminario en estos próximos 3 días, y nuevamente es mucho gusto en nombre de la universidad poder estar presente en esta inauguración. Muchas gracias.
Agradecemos desde luego las palabras del vicerrector de investigación, señor Pedro Puchón. Pues bien, es el momento de la conferencia magistral que inicia este seminario, la cual está a cargo de Laurajane Smith. Ella es profesora y directora del Centro de Patrimonio, directora del Centro de Patrimonio y Estudios Museísticos y directora de la Escuela de Arqueología y Antropología de la Universidad Nacional Australiana. Es miembro de la Academia de Ciencias Sociales en Australia. Ha sido autora de los libros Use of Heritage, Archaeological Theory and the Politics of Cultural Heritage. Además es coautora de Heritage, Communities and Archaeology, es editora de la International Journal of Heritage Studies y coeditora general de Routledge Series Key Issues in Cultural Heritage. Esta conferencia tendrá aproximadamente 1 hora de duración. Posteriormente se dispondrá de un espacio de preguntas de aproximadamente 20 minutos. Dejo a continuación con ustedes a la profesora Laurajane Smith.
Thank you for that introduction. And thank you very much for coming to hear me speak, and thank you, Olya, for the invitation and your hospitality while I have been here. Do I need to be on the pedestal, or can I, because I feel I should stay here?
Well, the microphone.
Oh, the microphone, of course, the microphone. Okay, I'll stay here. Right, so I may, as I get involved in what I'm talking about, lapse into Australian English, in which case I will start to talk very fast and use colloquialisms. They've been told to signal to you if I do this, so just let me know if the translators are going, please slow down. So what I want to do today is, it sounds very loud in my ears. What I want to do today is talk about research that I'm involved in at the present. So it's building on work that I've done in the book Uses of Heritage, and is looking specifically at how heritage becomes a political resource. Now, the first part of what I want to do today is theoretical. I want to talk about the theoretical framework that I'm developing for this work to help understand the nature of politics. And if we have time, I will go to a discussion of examples to illustrate what I'm trying to say. So, heritage and identity. These two concepts are inextricably linked in common sense and public imaginations, as indeed they are in academic debate, professional practice and public cultural policy. However, the way we define heritage, the idea that it is representative or even constitutive of identity remains strong. But what does this relationship do? How can we define the power and consequences of the interrelationship between heritage and identity? Why does heritage matter? Why does it matter so much that it can become embroiled within neighbourhood, regional, national, and even international conflicts? What power exactly does heritage have? To answer these questions, I turn to the debate over the politics of recognition and diversity, and argue that this provides a useful conceptual framework for understanding why heritage matters and the ways in which it can and does become a resource of power in political struggles. Moreover, I think the idea of heritage allows the concept of the politics of recognition, which has been criticised for being an abstraction, to be grounded in practical and everyday contexts. I'm just going to go away and so on. And that's fine. Okay. The way in which politics, and here I mean struggles and tensions over the distribution of power, has been experienced by citizens in democracies has substantially changed since the 1960s. The social democratic consensus has faced a number of challenges, not least of which is the rise of subnational collectives and movements, such as the civil rights movement, the women's movement, environmental movements, and Indigenous movements, the latter of which, of course, specifically challenges both colonialism and the idea of the singular nation. We can also add to this the new politics of multiculturalism and diversity. These developments have not only confronted assumptions about national identity, but also the idea that a monocultural national identity should and could correspond with political authority. The idea of recognition that incorporates a politics of identity has been formulated to both explain these changes and challenges, but also as a response to them. Now, there are varying arguments about the way recognition is understood in political philosophy, but in all forms, the politics of recognition can be characterised as a struggle in which particular groups demand acknowledgement and recognition from other groups in society of itself or aspects of its identity, and, by extension, its particular historical and contemporary circumstances. Other groups may resist these demands and thus work to exclude through the continuation of an absence of recognition or through the maintenance or development, I should say, of new formulations of misrecognition of both the group and or of individuals. This interaction will then have implications for understanding the nature of justice and how society should be organised so that everyone enjoys the recognition that is due them. Now, how and why this is played out, and most importantly, how the consequences of this are understood, varies within much of the debate. It is thus important to work through some of the nuances of this debate to tease out how I am applying the idea of the politics of recognition to heritage and institutions like museums and heritage regulatory societies and so on. And why in particular I favour the work of Nancy Fraser in this debate. Now, both Charles Taylor and Axel Honneth define claims to recognition as a particular human and emotional need that searches for respect and esteem. Failure to gain respect, they argue, will do psychological harm to those who remain unacknowledged and or for whom respect has been withheld. Taylor emphasises a politics of difference in which identity, for it to exist at all, itself requires conditional recognition by others. The gaining of respect, another form of recognition, will be dependent on the individual and group behaviour and achievements, and will ensure access to what Taylor defines as the fundamental or universal rights of individuals. While Honneth, on the other hand, argues receiving respect is central to individual and group self-respect and well-being. Taylor in particular tends to argue that lack of respect, itself a form of misrecognition, is of itself an act of injustice that is separate from other forms of inequity or oppression. Honneth also tends to see a search for respect as a key motive for recognition, although his argument about esteem adds another element to the politics of recognition. So for him, a search for esteem is about the negotiation of societal values as part of the new politics of recognition. He sees increasing pluralism in the values societies will accommodate or legitimise, and thus to be esteemed is to have one's values recognised as contributing to societal ethical goals and cultural self-understanding. For Taylor and Honneth, the withholding of rights to a collective rests on the low valuation of respect and esteem given to this group. For Nancy Fraser, however, a failure of individuals and collectives to be given respect and esteem may simply be understood as part of the consequences of misrecognition and marginalisation, and are in and of themselves insufficient to explain the drive for recognition. Fraser argues recognition needs to be approached in the spirit of pragmatism, and it should be conceived as a remedy for social injustice that is explicitly linked to struggles over the distribution of resources. Certainly Taylor's and Honneth's emphasis on the psychology of recognition does not go far enough. It nonetheless highlights the role emotion and emotional judgments can have in the ways in which the politics of recognition plays out, and I'll return to this point later. Claims for the recognition and of difference and identity are linked, as Fraser maintains, to demands and calls for restorative justice, and also to social inclusion and greater equity in political negotiations over the distributions of resources. And these include such things as finance, welfare, housing, education, and so on. For Fraser, redistribution and recognition are equally important and totally intertwined. Recognition cannot simply meet a so-called human need or address an abstract sense of well-being. It has, she argues, both a material motivation and consequence centred on restorative justice. Central to her concern is the idea of parity of participation. A lack of recognition or misrecognition denies parity of individuals and or groups in the participation in societal and policy negotiation over access to resources. The end result of recognition should be equity in societal participation and in the distribution of resources and rights. Now, of course, it does not follow that recognition will easily or automatically lead to redistribution. Those in privileged positions do not always surrender or share rights easily, of course. The politics of recognition, however, I think, offers a philosophical commitment to parity. And as Fraser suggests, the slogan for such a commitment should be no recognition without redistribution. For Fraser, the best remedy to injustice will always depend on the particular circumstances of a case, and any remedy must not then result in the shift of injustice to another party or the creation of new injustices. Responses to recognition can equally result in the extension of rights to marginal groups or to changing societal practices and or the withholding to all groups of particular rights previously understood by Taylor as universal. However, demands for recognition, as Fraser notes, do not always have to be met, particularly if meeting those demands create new forms of injustice. A politics of recognition must, by definition, accommodate diversity, and thus assimilation of diversity into normative identities and values is not a resolution of claims to recognition. Now, identity politics has often been dismissed or disparaged within heritage studies as the special pleadings of stakeholders or interests. Identity politics may be understood as an attempt to, as Iris Marion Young argues, as an attempt to cultivate mutual identification among those similarly situated. While these claims may generate conflict, they are differentiated from claims to recognition, as the latter are rarely asserted for their own sake. That is, recognition is rarely asserted simply to do so, and rather are part of claims for political inclusion and economic opportunity. Certainly, identity politics, or a politics of difference, can form the basis of claims to recognition. But separating identity politics out from a politics of recognition allows heritage professionals to understand the wider political contexts in which some claims are made, and more importantly, the consequences of those claims for the parity of participation. Now, not all inequality results from misrecognition or a lack of recognition of the cultural values of particular groups, and may rest, for instance, on changes in capital flows. But misrecognition can become a post hoc rationalisation for inequitable treatment. Certainly, the politics of recognition does not claim to address all forms of political negotiations, nor does it explain all forms of injustice. However, it offers a persuasive understanding of why identity has become such a central concern and focus in social and political debates, and how it may be utilised to develop rationalisations for new or ongoing injustice. Moreover, recognition, as Iris Young argues, is also a necessary circumstance of democracy and democratic representation. Recognition is also conceived as an ongoing struggle. Equilibrium cannot be reached in democratic struggles over recognition. Any resolution will always contain non-consensus, injustice, and compromise. As such, resolutions to claims for recognition will inevitably be open to further democratic dissent and renegotiation. Moreover, inherent in this process is the risk that further misrecognition may also be a result of recognition claims that only further undermines parity and equity. So it's an ongoing, never-ending negotiation over the distribution of resources. Some criticism of the politics of recognition argues that there is too much focus on the issue of subaltern identity and not enough on dominant identities. Certainly, I think it seems logical that a degree of what I'm calling self-recognition must underwrite a politics of recognition, in that individuals and groups must be able to historically situate their social and cultural identity and experiences. That is, those seeking justice must first recognise themselves as the inheritors of particular marginalised identities and seek solidarity with those similarly positioned. In addition, those from whom recognition is sought must self-recognise and historically situate themselves as the inheritors of privilege and rights denied to others. Now, this is not to say that hegemonic groups, that is not to say that hegemonic groups have to take responsibility for past wrongs, only the contemporary legacy, of course, of those wrongs. Nonetheless, the recognition of difference requires grounding in a reflexive recognition of self. Further, it is vital that any self-recognition must also acknowledge the power structures within which particular identities and groups are located. Failure to do so will mean that any offers of recognition will simply cultivate new misrecognitions and deprivations. It's also useful to note that those from dominant groups may also seek recognition because they sincerely, however misguidingly, believe that they are discriminated against, or they may involve themselves in this as an active strategy to exclude the recognition of others. In either case, dominant groups will also enter into claims and counterclaims for recognition. However, the ability of dominant groups to engage in critical reflections to a level sufficient to acknowledge the need to recognise others in such a way that it facilitates redistribution requires considerable self-evaluation. And at this point, I return to the arguments of Honneth and Taylor's discussions about and their points about well-being and emotion. While both Honneth and Taylor consider the emotional impact of non or misrecognition, it is also useful to consider the emotional skills and consequences of also offering recognition. It's at this point that issues such as shame, pride, self-esteem, and empathy need to be considered. The sociologist Andrew Sayer, in his discussion of class and recognition, notes that, and I'm quoting here, sentiments such as pride, shame, envy, resentment, compassion, and contempt are not just forms of affect, that is, they're not just forms of emotion, but they are evaluative judgments of how people are being treated as regards what they value, that is, things they consider to affect their well-being, end quote. These emotions may not only engender claims for recognition, as Honneth would note, but should be considered in terms of how the politics of recognition and distribution are played out. For example, issues of shame can be used, as Andrew Sayer argues, to encourage social conformity in particular groups, which may then fail to make claims for recognition or may compel others to seek recognition. Emotions provide an energy that propels us towards an act. This act may be to seek recognition, but equally it can be about offering recognition. For instance, shame may work, as Sayer goes on to argue, to motivate those offering recognition, and gives the example of anti-racists who may indeed be motivated by their shame of racism to extend recognition that facilitates redistribution. Negative emotions can be highly significant in withholding or denying recognition, as those from privileged positions shrink away from negative feelings such as guilt and shame. However, I think empathy is key to making evaluative judgments, particularly about the lack of equity and parity of participation needed for privileged groups to offer meaningful recognition. Now, as both an emotion and a skill, empathy is central to the self-recognition and to the self-reflection needed by dominant or privileged groups to recognise themselves as needing to offer recognition and respect. Empathy, however, has been criticised as a superficial emotion that privileged groups may feel for another, and having felt it can then move on without gaining any real insight or to the inequalities experienced by others. Insincere or shallow expressions of empathy will fail to extend recognition and may only work to allow, if you like, dominant groups to feel better and more secure in their own identities. So I felt that, let's move on and forget. Nevertheless, what Susan Sontag refers to as a sincere empathy is crucial to imagine alternative futures and projects where social justice is addressed. Now, of course, the issue of emotion and imagination, when linked to the past, must, of course, involve memory. As Sue Campbell and Adam Morton argue, the emotional truth, or what we may call emotional authenticity, of the processes of remembering help to validate what is remembered. To allow the possibility of recognition and or the overturning of misrecognition, empathy and imagination has to be expressed and mediated against a measure of emotional intelligence. Now, here I define emotional intelligence as the skill to recognise an emotional response and to be active in the way that it is used in judgments. Now, it's an interesting point that emotion, empathy, like the concept of heritage itself, have all been dismissed as subjective and thus unreliable. However, they can be usefully understood as phenomena that interact to have a consequence, and their unreliability rests not in opposition to abstract notions of objectivity, but rather because together they work to continually make and remake particular understandings and relationships of self and other, so that together they can either uphold or challenge established social relations and interactions. So, how exactly does the idea of heritage fit into the politics of recognition? And I want to move now to a discussion of some of the implications for me that I'm drawing out of this theoretical idea. Okay, and there are six points that I want to draw out, and I apologise that this is in English, but I don't have access to a Spanish speaker to help me translate this. Thank you. Okay, appeals to the past lend historical and cultural legitimacy to claims to difference and particular claims to identity. Heritage is implicated in the politics of recognition in a number of ways, but it also may allow us to add extra dimensions to the understanding of this struggle, to ground it, if you like, in the everyday. And as I said, there are 6 points. 6 points at which heritage becomes deeply embroiled in the politics of recognition. And first, the first point bear with me. I've skipped a page. Okay. All right. Firstly, authority is given to the idea of heritage as a representation of identity. It's common sense. It's become this linkage, as I said at the beginning, between heritage and identity is very much embedded in common sense understandings of heritage, and indeed in public policy and many international and national government treaties and legislation. The second point is that individuals and groups may also be expected to turn to museums and heritage to seek validation and understanding of their own or another's identity and historical and contemporary social economic experience. In this case, heritage sites and museums may be directly or indirectly facilitate either the seeking or conferring of recognition, or indeed the maintenance of the status quo, or they may offer alternative strategies for denying recognition. The third point, and this is, and here I'm drawing on the idea of what I've called the authorised heritage discourse, and the slide abbreviated to AHD. Now, I've argued previously that there exists an international Eurocentric discourse of heritage, a dominant discourse that emphasises that heritage is materiality, heritage is something that possesses innate value and innate meaning, and is best served by the practices of expertise, such as archaeologists, art historians, architects, and so on. And that this authorised discourse has become embedded within international treaties such as those developed by UNESCO and ICOMOS. But it is inherently Eurocentric. So this discourse, within the framework of the politics of recognition, we expect becomes directly, again, implicated in this politics as it is used to assert particular understandings of heritage and to deny other understandings of heritage, particularly that of intangible heritage or the heritage of communities, because another aspect of the authorised heritage discourse is the idea that heritage is ultimately and intimately associated with national identity. So subnational identities, Indigenous identities, and so on become marginalised within this process. So the very practices, the day-to-day practices of the implementation of the authorised heritage discourse can work to covertly and overtly withhold or deny recognition. And it becomes heritage practices and policy and perceptions indeed of heritage framed within the authorised heritage discourse become a point of resistance. They become a focus for resistance to those seeking recognition, or challenging at least misrecognition. The fourth point, of course, is that those seeking recognition will inevitably, and indeed have to, they have to seek such recognition outside of the confines or in opposition to what I've just described as the authorised heritage discourse, or the AHD. And a fifth point relates to the re-theorisation of heritage as a cultural process. Now, one of the arguments that in much of my previous work, I should say, that I've been developing, is the argument that heritage is not the things that the authorised heritage discourse identifies. It is not necessarily archaeological sites, historic buildings, museum artefacts, and so forth. It is what we do with those things, that these things are simply cultural tools in the processes of heritage making. That heritage is in fact a process, or if you like, a cultural performance, in which we negotiate a sense of identity, in which we engage in remembering and commemoration, and work through what the past means for the present and its significance and value in the present, particularly for contemporary issues and problems that we engage with in the present. So heritage, I've argued, is very much a cultural process. It is not a thing. So if we accept the idea that heritage is storytelling, that heritage is a negotiation of what the past may mean for the present, that it is an engagement of people with other people rather than people with things, then heritage becomes even more deeply embedded within the politics of recognition. Finally, heritage also highlights, the sixth point, is that heritage highlights the importance of self-recognition. And the importance of this self-recognition in the politics of recognition. The affirming authority of heritage to underpin self-confidence and self-esteem in one's identity is an important point from which individuals and collectives can launch claims for recognition, or indeed offer recognition to others, or take the resolve to ignore and thus deny the claims for recognition and redistribution of others. Now, I've been applying these ideas of recognition to a range of examples and research, ethnographic research that I've done in the United Kingdom with communities who are forming together to assert the legitimacy of their heritage, to make claims for recognition and the redistribution of resources. But I've also been using this in a far less obvious way to engage with the ways in which people visit museums and heritage sites. And if I've got time, how is my time going? It's okay? Okay. Signal to me when I've got 5 minutes left. Okay. Because I can go on now about the data that I'm collecting. So, as I said, I'm applying this idea to I've been applying this idea to work that I've been doing now for over 10 years with analysing visitor responses to visits to a range of heritage sites in the United States, England and Australia. Now I've done just over 4,500 interviews with visitors to 45 different museums and heritage sites in these three countries. They're qualitative interviews. I don't have time to go over the methodology, but I can answer questions if you wish. But overall, I've used structured interviews. All have been recorded, or most have been recorded, and a core set of open-ended questions have been asked across all sites. Okay. And then the interviews were coded to pull out the themes that were occurring organically within the interviews. Now, sites for interviews were chosen because either they offered a consensus narrative of national history or they offered dissonant and contested histories. And depending on the country that I was working in, these sites, the dissonant and contested sites, represented either legacies of enslavement, immigration, labour heritage, and the history and Indigenous history and culture, sites of Indigenous history and culture. So next slide. Okay, that just shows you my population sample. That just to be methodologically transparent, the profile that you see here is relatively similar to museum visitor profiles across most museums. That is, they tend to be white, they tend to be middle class, they tend to be well educated. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. Now, coming out of this data, the coding of this data are about 5 themes or 5 heritage performances. If you remember back, I talked about heritage as a process, as a process of meaning making, that it is a performative act. And visiting heritage and museum sites is in itself a performative act of heritage making. And there are 5 such performances that are undertaken. The most dominant of these is the performance of reinforcement, which I'm not going to talk about. But one of the performances, and the second performance, again another dominant performance, is that of intergenerational communication. Hardly surprising. But the one I want to talk about here is the 4th one, the offering of recognition and respect, and indeed the continuation of misrecognition. And this is one of the heritage-making performances that are done in museums and heritage sites. So, there are a number of ways in which the performance of recognition or misrecognition is played out. The first one I want to talk about is the performance of self-recognition and how this gets implicated within the politics of recognition. Visitors will go to sites to assess their identity. At dissonant sites, this may be done as a search for self-esteem and assertions that their historical and contemporary experiences matter. An important baseline from which, and this is an important baseline from which to make claims for recognition. And visitors may in various ways express their identities in contexts where they perceive a lack of recognition. So this person here is saying, as an immigrant myself, this is the people who really built New York. They're at the New York Tenement Museum, a museum dealing with working class and immigrant history. So as an immigrant myself, and this is This is the people who really built New York, and by connotation, America. These stories are never told. The next example comes from the Mashantucket Pequot Museum in Connecticut, United States, a museum run by Indigenous people. The interviewer, myself, asked, what, if any, meaning does this museum have for contemporary America? The response, we're still here. Who's the we, can I ask? The native Indigenous people are still here. There's still a lot of us, even though maybe a lot of them are uprooted, but. So this second quote explains the importance of the Mashantucket Pequot Museum. It's, as I said, run by the Pequot themselves. But it underlines its importance in authorising particular claims for recognition and redistribution, and it is no accident, I think, that this museum is attached to a casino, where redistribution is most specifically happening. Visitors may also use their visits to self-recognise as the inheritors of privilege. Next. Well, and this person is saying, well, you know, you would say, sadly, like you guys, Australians, referring back to me, you know, we as the white people, we're the people that were the invaders, you know, brought the disease, brought the killings and all that stuff. So in these examples, people are negotiating as they visit the museums. They're negotiating their sense of identity, their sense of self-recognition, which, as I said, is an important first step in making offers for recognition or asserting claims for recognition. The second is that some visitors, I should say, at museums were also making claims for recognition, that their visit to museums was a performance of seeking recognition. So this person is saying, getting older is a bit of a pain, so I keep having to switch my glasses back and forth. I think it gives, this person is saying, and this is at an English exhibition on the history of British involvement in the enslavement of Africans. So this person is saying, I think it gives the message to remind people, to treat people, to be aware of where we buy our things or how we live our lives. And I think it's also a message that this country did get there on the back of others. It didn't just occur. I think too many people are very nationalistic at times. They forget that this country was built on the sweat of others. It didn't just happen in a sort of glamorous Jane Austen type of way. Okay, the next example is misrecognition. Now, of course, nationalistic exclusive self-recognition can also assert identities that casually exclude the possibility of recognition of diversity, but may actively do so in a form of denying recognition to others. And this is the case here, where Australian rural dwellers, that is from the farming communities, they're working here to self-consciously celebrate their identities at a museum, a nationalistic museum called the Stockman's Hall of Fame. It's a museum that celebrates rural Australians, because we have an origin myth in Australia that Australia was born on the back of a sheep. And there is a tendency for this story or this mythology of nationhood to deny the legitimacy of multicultural urban dwellers who are perceived to threaten rural subsidies, economic subsidies given to wealthy farmers. So this person is saying, I just reckon that the majority of people take advantage of this history and rural culture, and it means something to people who have closer ties with the country. I look at what our urban city populations are today, and fortunately I feel that they aren't really what I call Australians. And the next person says, I'm in the bush, that is rural Australia, is the real Australia, but the cities aren't. So this is an example of people engaging in a performance that allows the continuation of misrecognition of multiculturalism, of Indigenous Australians, and allows the creation and reinforcement of national myths. And indeed, it's also an example of hegemonic groups making their own claims for recognition that both perpetuate others, as I said, others' misrecognition and lack of respect, but asserts their own recognition in an attempt to influence their own legitimacy. Fourth, okay, offering recognition to others. And interestingly, people in all three countries used a visit to a museum as a way of performing a desire to recognise, to give respect to others. And they particularly did this, of course, when they visited museums of cultural or historical groups that they themselves did not belong to. So, for example, in Australia, an Australian site called Uluru, which is an Indigenous site, it's a big monolith in the middle of Australia. Indigenous people argue that it is sacrilege for people to climb to the top of the rock, but the tourism pressures is such that that climb is permissible, legally permissible. But many people who visited Uluru took a stance to offer recognition to the local Indigenous communities by not climbing. So they did a very distinctive performance or overt performance of choosing not to climb as a mark of respect. Others offered recognition in talking about the messages or the meanings of the site that they took away, or that the meaning that the museum had for them. And in this example, this is a English-Irish Australian at the immigration site, a museum of immigration, celebrating the fact that, of course, all Australians, unless you are an Indigenous person, are of course immigrants to that country. So this person is saying, I think it's an appreciation of what the immigrants have done, and the fact that we've all been able to live together so well and just have that diversity, and be able to appreciate everyone's diversity even though there are differences. So this person is recognising that diversity and difference is a legitimate thing. Next. Now, the fifth way that museums and heritage sites are used used within the politics of recognition is the idea that they're social barometers, that this is a very active and entirely self-conscious way that museums were used. And they were used this way particularly by people that I interviewed who self-identified as Indigenous or as African Americans or as African Caribbean British. And their visit was used to assess the extent to which an exhibition, or the museum as a whole, was representing wider societal attitudes and understandings, and used museums, as I said, as a form of social barometer to test whether wider societal was recognising or continuing to misrecognise them. And this again is an example. This is a woman who identified as both Indigenous and African American. It's at an exhibition at the Smithsonian History Museum on Thomas Jefferson and his engagement with slavery. It was also important to note that it was the first, it was meant to represent the first exhibition of the new Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. I interviewed this person in 2012 before that museum was established, but this was meant to be the first exhibition of that museum held in the parent history museum. So this person says that this exhibition on Jefferson and his raping of his slaves, and the issue that was the children that were produced from those events. I think it just spreads. I think for some people that don't know anything about slavery, it would probably be a good exhibition. But for people that are educated and have learned something about slavery, they would know that this is like a setback to me in relations to me. I think this is a setback. I ask, setback in what way? Because it's just another thing saying, oh, you were slaves. So you're still only expected to do certain things. So instead of telling people how they were slaves, how about telling them about how they can be doctors, can be lawyers, or, you know, people like from the 1940s that went through a lot to be a doctor or be a lawyer, because there were African American doctors and lawyers. So I think that's what I came to see. I don't want to come to see about slavery. And this is a very important point in what was meant to be the first exhibition dealing with African American, of the African American Museum. So, the sixth point and final point that I want to make is the idea about the collective performances of how museum visiting and visiting heritage sites may be seen as a collective performance of recognition and misrecognition. So to date, so far I've looked at individuals visiting and the meanings constructed by individuals. But there is a collective performance of visiting certain places, of doing or not doing things at them, such as deciding not to climb Uluru, for instance. And that these may also be read and understood as directly implicated in the politics of recognition or indeed misrecognition. So choosing to visit certain places and choosing not to visit certain places is a collective statement, a collective performance. Now, there are two intertwined implications of this collective performance. The first is that the collective aspect of visiting, of seeing people like yourself at certain places, is part of the processes of reinforcing and affirming self-recognition and self-esteem. Following on from this, the second implication is that wider societal meanings are reinforced by visiting sites that, regardless of individual meaning, hold particular wider societal social meanings. So visiting is a way of authorising particular social meanings and historical and social narratives. It's one of the reasons why museums are so concerned about, you know, how many visitors they're getting. The more visitors they get, of course, the more they are authorised, the more they are seen as offering a legitimate view of history. A final example that illustrates the complexity of recognition here is quite a complex one, so I want you to bear with me. The visitor is responding to the question, are there any messages about the history or heritage of America that you take away from this museum? The museum in question is the Museum of Civil Rights in Memphis, Tennessee. The speaker is a woman visiting that museum with her 12-year-old son. She's a postal worker. She self-identified herself as Black American. Okay, so I think we need to go to the next slide. Yes, next slide. Okay, so she says, bear with me as I read this for those, as it's not in Spanish. It really is just the history of it. So, to know, and me being a union president and things, it puts me on focus. The visit puts me on focus. And being a parent of young kids and a young parent, it just puts me on focus as to my kids. When I brought my youngest son here, he'll be 13 next month, and we walked through what the Ku Klux Klans were. There's an exhibition, I should say, part of the exhibition, our Klans clothes. I think he may have been about 4 in the first visit. And when we came through, my first thought was, what are those white people doing in their head? Because they know what they did to us. I mean, just honestly. And I'm looking around because I'm astonished at that. And then, when my son walked upon the Ku Klux Klan, he said out loud, as kids do, "Mama, whose pyjamas are those?" And everyone turned and looked at me, and I was like, "Those aren't pyjamas," I said. "I'll tell you about them." And you know they're waiting. So she's referring to the white visitors. They're waiting for my answer. So we keep going. And I'm like reading this stuff to him, saying, and this is what they did to black people, and this is what, next slide. And he burst out again, "Who's black, Mama?" And I say, "Oh my God." And I look at him, and I saw this white guy watching, and I'm like, "You're black." And he was like, "No, I'm not black, I'm yellow." And I say, "Okay." And I remember what my pastor said, "You don't know you're poor until you're told you're poor. You don't know you're black until you're told you're black. He never knew he was black. So, you know, I'm like, wow. So when I bring him here, he learns more. And we come every year because I have family down here. Now, in this example, there's a lot of performances going on. There's intergenerational communication, there's reinforcement of her own identity and political values as a unionist, as a civil rights activist, and as a parent. But there is also a complex performance of both self and familial recognition, and a claim for recognition being made here as well. She's not at all happy to see whites in the museum, people unlike herself. Now, to understand her discomfort, we need to appreciate that she is passing on social and familial memories of not just discrimination, but also of the civil rights movement's continuing struggles to overcome prejudice to her son, and thus creating self-recognition for him of his place in US society. Now, as Judith Butler notes, one of the problematic aspects of recognition is that it can, and I quote, inscribe injury into identity and makes that a presupposition of political self-recognition, end quote. And as she goes on to warn, injury cannot then be recast as an oppression to be overcome. The mother speaking here is reacting against this possibility. She is uncomfortable about the presence of whites in the museum because of the opportunity of misrecognition of self that their presence presents for her son. She does not want established ideas of recognition of African Americans to prevail. She does not want injury to be part of his self-recognition. As she noted earlier in the interview, next slide, being at the museum, next slide. Okay, I'll read it to you. Being at the museum made her, and I quote, feel good to know that there was a history for us to move forward from. The public arena of the museum opens up, for her at least, greater risks of misrecognition. And I would also add, this puts a lie to the dominant discourse within museology and heritage studies that museums and heritage places are safe places. For this woman and her child, of course, this is not a safe, museums are not a safe place. Museums are places of tension. They are places of, the possibilities of recognition, but also equally the possibilities of misrecognition that has huge implications, political implications for the redistribution of resources, whether that's access to land, access to education, welfare, and so on, and simple finance, and so on. Now, I'm going to stop here, but my overall argument, in conclusion, my overall argument is that heritage is intimately implicated in the politics of recognition and redistribution. Now, I want to stress, I am not making grandiose claims that museums and heritage sites are entirely responsible for the ways in which the politics of recognition are played out, just that they are part of that process. But understanding this, understanding that they're part of the processes of recognition, that what we do in the museums and heritage fields has implications for the ways in which the politics of recognition is played out, requires us as academics, as museum professionals, or as heritage professionals to consider the social and political responsibilities that our work does in society, the consequences, the impact that that the ideas that we generate about the past and its relationship to the present have for a range of groups, not least of which, of course, Indigenous groups in Australia and the United States, where I am working, but other groups who seek to utilise museums to assert their legitimacy or to assess the ways in which those sites are offering recognition or misrecognition. Thanks very much. Very happy. Thanks. That was almost a total embarrassment. I almost ended up down the stairs. So, questions?
Tenemos asignado un tiempo de más o menos 20 minutos para preguntas. El micrófono es disponible. Por favor, que levante la mano quien quiere hacer alguna pregunta a la conferencista. ¿No hay preguntas? ¿Comentarios? Ya.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Nadia Lara, soy estudiante de doctorado en... Mi nombre es Nadia Lara, soy estudiante de doctorado en Ciencias de la Comunicación. Le agradezco la conferencia y me gustaría que profundizara un poco más en la parte metodológica, al menos de esto.
They can't hear you.
Tienes que hablar más fuerte para que te escuchen. Pero no creo que sea...
Ya, ¿sí? Ahora sí. ¿De nuevo todo?
Sí. Mi nombre es Nadia Hidalgo, soy estudiante de doctorado en Ciencias de la Comunicación. Le agradezco la conferencia y me gustaría que profundizara un poco en los aspectos metodológicos, al menos de esta investigación que nos presentó los resultados. Eso específicamente.
Sure. The question is about methodology. Okay. The first point I would make, that this is research that I've been doing over a long time, 4,500 interviews. The first point I would make is that the database is somewhat confronting, and the first lesson that I learned from that methodology is way too big. The database is problematic. But okay, so what I was interested in is looking at the memory and identity work basically that visitors did while they toured museums and heritage sites. And I wanted to understand how they were making heritage. If we accept the premise or my argument that heritage is not so much a thing or a place, it's a performance, it's what people do with the thing or place that is most important, and it is the moment at which heritage is constructed. I was interested in understanding and mapping the different performances. So I selected museums based on a range of, as I said in the lecture, on whether or not they were representative consensus national narratives, and I wanted to look at how that was being opposed. So I looked at museums of a range of museums that drew from dissonant or contested histories. And so I approached visitors at museums with a microphone and a schedule, a defined set of questions. Some were specific to the museum, but there was, as I said, 12 core questions that I asked at the museum, that I asked across all the museums. And so I recorded, with permission of course, their responses. These were transcribed, and each question then was coded, looking for the themes that emerged from the data. Now, the point, this was an important point methodologically, because in visitor studies in museums and heritage sites, inevitably there is a questionnaire that is asked of visitors in this sort of research that asks often on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 7, how much do you agree with the statement I've just made? So my concern was actually not to follow that methodology, but to get people to tell me what they thought they were doing. And so the material was coded, and I entered the codes into a statistical package for the social sciences, SPSS, and got descriptive statistics. So that allowed me to see what people were doing. It was also very useful. It's a mixed methodology here that allowed me to test some of the assumptions that I was making, because often, you're standing in a museum and you're listening to people talking to you and you think, oh, I'm getting some really interesting data here, and then you go and code it and you realise actually the interesting data was only 5% and you were only hearing it. So that's so I got descriptive stats, but I also am engaging with the material quantitatively as well. So looking at fleshing out those codes and looking at the nuances in the ways in which people are engaged in museums. So the 5 performances rather that I identified are based on that statistical and qualitative analysis. Does that respond? Right. But one of the things that came out of the study, aside from this issue, looking at the politics of recognition, but was one of the dominant assumptions in museology and heritage studies is that people go to museums to be educated. That is the reason, you know, often the whole reason that we see that for the existence of museums, that these are perceived as and perceive themselves as educational resources. And when visitors were asked why they had come, they often said actually they'd come for educational reasons. But when you interrogated that further, when you drilled down and asked further questions, that's not what was happening. So as I said, the dominant performance that I got from the museums was that of reinforcement. And visitors often talked about their visits, the meanings of their visits, the messages that they took away. Response to a question that I asked, is there anything that you've read or seen here today that has changed your views about the past or present? They used the word reinforcement. It came up again and again and again. People didn't talk about education, or when they did talk about education other than for the reason that they came, they talked about the value and meaning of the site in relation to the education of others, not of themselves. So reinforcement, that sense of searching for legitimacy of what you already know or believe, was a dominant. And that, the other point that came out of the stuff that is relevant to the discussion today is that visitors took away the messages that they came into the museum with. So regardless of what the curatorial intent of a particular message of an exhibition or heritage site was, people were influenced by their own ideological positions coming into the museum. So if they had a conservative bent, they took away conservative messages. If they had a progressive bent, they took away progressive messages. And this is regardless of the intention. Even in exhibitions where the curatorial team was attempting to subvert nationalistic consensus narratives about Australian or American or British history, visitors nonetheless were not, on the whole, engaged with those alternative messages. They were interested in reinforcing the messages, the entrance narratives that they came in with. Sorry, that was a very long-winded response to your question.
Bueno, no sé si lo han pedido.
Mari Compuche, Mari Jiménez. Hola, les doy gracias por lo que está compartiendo con nosotros. Yo soy estudiante de arte y de estética de esta universidad. Me interesa el tema porque soy mapuche y encuentro que existen diferencias museísticas respecto a la visión que se tiene de tratar la identidad. Me refiero, por ejemplo, a los museos de arte contemporáneo, donde se genera epistemología, conocimiento que va a reflexionar sobre los asuntos políticos y culturales de la contingencia. Pero por otro lado están los museos de antropología, donde se clasifica y se cosifica una cultura. Esas dos diferencias hacen que la distancia entre el mundo mapuche y los museos sea por lo menos sospechosa respecto a cómo la vemos nosotros como una entidad chilena
Huinca le decimos nosotros, o no mapuche. Porque se entiende el patrimonio mapuche como algo que está en la misma naturaleza. Entonces el museo tiene esa cosa que nos puede como clasificar o cosificar. Entonces, como entidad, yo la veo como sospecha y me genera ciertos conflictos que desde la institucionalidad aún no haya como una reflexión respecto a cómo se podría intentar hacer un museo con la cultura mapuche, con nuestro pueblo, no desde la cosificación antropológica, sino desde el pensamiento propio de nosotros, porque aún Chile está muy atrasado en eso y eso también nos aleja también de nuestro camino a la autodeterminación como cultura. Por eso el museo yo siempre lo he visto como una entidad peligrosa para nosotros mismos. Más allá de que yo sea artista, siempre está como esa sospecha de incorporar mi cultura mapuche a los museos, porque existe como un paso, una doble identidad, un ocultamiento de parte de nosotros como una estrategia de separarnos también de la epistemología chilena o Huinca.
Yes, I think, I mean, that you basically is a very important points that you're making in terms of the power of museums to make misrepresentation that becomes authoritative and legitimises continuing racism and lack of respect for diversity, lack of respect for particular histories and cultures within a society. And it's no accident, drawing on my experiences in Australia, that it was in the 1960s when the Indigenous movements in Australia first became public. Of course, Indigenous resistance to colonisation occurred right from the very start, but when it started to become more a public civil rights movement in the 1960s, one of the first targets of the Indigenous movement was museums and heritage sites and archaeologists and historians and other academics working in those arenas, the arenas of Indigenous history and cultural identity. Because of course it became very important for Australian Indigenous people to control how their heritage was being perceived. Because, as they argued, to control that perception was an important act of self-determination. But I would also argue it's an important act of within the politics of recognition to make the assertions of the legitimacy of particular historical experiences and contemporary experiences that legitimise claims for the redistribution of power, the redistribution of resources, and access to policymakers. So yes, I think these are, we often hide behind it's just a museum, it's just a heritage site, but these things are very powerful.
Hola, soy Bárbara Osa y me gustaría preguntarte respecto del rol de los profesionales e investigadores del patrimonio respecto al tema que has tratado a lo largo de la conferencia, y me gustaría preguntarte qué futuros estudios o investigaciones consideras necesarias a partir de los planteamientos que nos has presentado hoy día y de las investigaciones que has realizado a lo largo de Estados Unidos, Inglaterra y Australia en estos últimos años.
Okay, I think it's I think it's very important in heritage studies. Traditionally, there has been a tendency for heritage, for disciplines such as history, archaeology, anthropology, to come in and look at the phenomenon of heritage. But I think because of the consequences of heritage, the impact that it has in society, that it is very important to bring an interdisciplinary understanding to heritage. I come ultimately from a background of archaeology, and archaeologists deal with the past. They claim that they understand the politics of archaeology, but often this is not the case. So in my own journey, intellectual journey, for me it became very important to engage interdisciplinary, to really understand the wider implications of what I'm doing to break those disciplinary boundaries. So, my work is as much informed, well, I'm a recovering archaeologist. My research is far much more informed by sociology, by politics, by philosophy, anthropology, than it was archaeology. And it was liberating. That is liberating for me. Was liberating for me to stretch those intellectual boundaries. So I think interdisciplinary research or multidisciplinary research is challenging, it's terrifying, but it is extremely rewarding. Having said that though, it does open up problematics for young academics. I was very lucky in my career that my interdisciplinary research did not hold me back. But in terms of getting jobs in academia, people like to be able to say, you are a historian, you are an archaeologist, you are an anthropologist, and to say, well, I'm a heritage scholars person, I'm interdisciplinary, it's like, well, what? Where do you fit? So there is a danger, but, and others within heritage studies have opted to keep a foot in both camps, interdisciplinary, and to have their identity also as a particular scholar, whether it's a historian or archaeologist or whatever. But yes, it's a process that needs to be navigated. But the Association of Critical Heritage Studies is a new association that is free to join. So look it up on the web, and it's a network designed as a network of scholars to help facilitate interdisciplinary research and to give support to those of us working in the heritage area.
Tenemos tiempo para una pregunta más.
Hola, mi nombre es Juan Pablo Griches y también agradecer por la conferencia y preguntar más que nada, hoy en día existen muchas prácticas nuevas quizás que nos ha permitido la tecnología que se traducen en distintas performances en sitios, a veces como de patrimonio disonante o conflictivo y que generan, o sea, en el fondo quizás preguntarte cómo ves tú estas prácticas de quizás tomarse fotos en sitios conflictivos o sitios de memoria difícil dentro, como los que estabas presentando, como un museo de la esclavitud o monumentos a ese tipo de episodios. ¿Cómo ves estas prácticas dentro de los actos de performance que ocurren al momento de visitar un sitio?
Thank you for the question. It's a good question. The practices within museums and heritage that I've witnessed in the studies that I've done over the last 10 years with these institutions in dealing with dissonant and contested histories that have worked, where people have in fact said, oh, actually, yes, my views have entirely changed, or I'm thinking more deeply about this, or I'm not sure, but I'm not as confident in myself as in my identity as I used to be. Were instances where the museological, the curatorial practice didn't shy away from being emotional, from providing the visitor with the emotional tools that they needed to navigate the complex and difficult history that they were being confronted with. It doesn't say that it always worked. Of course it didn't. But where it did work, the curators or heritage interpreters were not afraid to try and engender an imaginative and deep empathetic response. One of the things that also came out of the research that I'm doing is that those who engage, so I'm measuring people's engagement relative within the whole 4,500, and I talk about the registers of engagement. So those who are looking at those who are deeply engaged and those who are engaged shallowly they're simply rote reinforcement. Those who come from a higher educational background, who've been educated within the university systems, tended to engage in a far more shallow way than those who did not have such an educational background. And I think one of the things in operation there is that, at least in the 3 countries that I was looking at, there is a tendency in the education system to downplay the role of emotion in the way we make judgments, in the role of emotion cognitively. And so that influenced how people were responding to the. For those who came from who did not have a university background, they were this is not one-to-one, but they were more likely, there was a tendency for them to engage far more emotionally and therefore to get more cognitively out of the exhibition. There was also a sense too that those who were the traditional visitors to museum, that is white, privileged, middle class, educated, tended to be performing that privilege. They tended to be seeking reinforcements that those who didn't come from, those who had a lower educational attainment or came from ethnic minorities were far more politically active in the way they engaged with the museums. I mean, that's obvious, but I've got now the data to suggest that is in fact occurring. And it was those people that were far more likely to respond to the emotional and utilise them in emotionally intelligent ways to respond to the curatorial attempts to engage their emotions. Finished? Done? Yeah.